Hello, friends. Here it is, the day after Easter. I hope you had a great Easter yesterday. I'm assuming with family and friends. So today we're going to be talking about this chapter on deception. I'm not going to. I might circle back and talk about chapter 11, but I might just skip that and leave that to you. Just a couple of things to consider. It's just a list of different methods or strategies for persuading others. And just a couple of things, they're multiple step strategies. It's not just one thing you do, but it occurs in multiple steps. And then second is, that they are behavior focused on what people do. So, but anyway, you can read those, a variety of different methods. And like I said, I might come back to that. But anyway, today we're talking about deception, which is kind of an interesting topic. And deception, some general thoughts about deception. First of all, it is a form of persuasion, which we don't usually think about it that way. We think about it more primarily, I would think, in moral categories, but we can understand it as a method of communication, a form of persuasion, not a positive one, not one that we would encourage anybody to use, but it is a form of persuasion. And by that, we mean that it is intentional, purposeful form of communication. And the way that the book describes it is that it is a deliberate message of distortion, that we are intentionally trying to mislead someone rather than speaking truth. And it certainly is not a Christian principle to be deceptive. And we could go through Bible verses and talk about our commitment to the truth and seeking truth and proclaiming truth would be a principle for Christians to follow. And also, I would add that it's not accidental or incidental, that we don't accidentally try to deceive someone. It's an intentional approach. Sometimes we might accidentally mislead someone, that we say something we thought was true that ended up not being true, or it was partially true, or we misunderstood, or so that would be, I guess, accidental deception, but there was no malice or intention behind it. But when we talk about deception, we are talking about an intentional approach to misleading someone. It seeks to alter beliefs, attitudes, impressions of others. Okay, so three different approaches to understanding deception. This is trying to get behind the thought a little bit. So let's talk about that for a moment. There are these three different approaches they have to helping us to understand deception. And the first way they say to get an angle at this is to talk about motivations for lying. In other words, why do we seek to deceive and lead people astray? And studies have shown these variety of different methods. Lying to benefit another, that we lie on behalf of someone else. We're trying to cover for them or make life a little bit easier for them. This might be, in our category of white lies. So it's nice and it's not intentionally malicious. Second is lying for affiliation, that we want to connect with somebody, we want to build a relationship with them, so we lie in that form. Number three, lie to protect privacy. There's self-protection. We don't want people to know all of our business. Lying to avoid conflict, that we don't tell somebody the truth to avoid having a run-in, and people have an aversion to getting involved in conflict. At least I think most people do. And so sometimes we will not tell the truth so we don't have to get into it with somebody. It's just easier to lie and avoid the conflict. But it's probably going to come up later anyway, but we just don't want to deal with a problem. The next one, lie to appear better. This is where we tell somebody that we are taller, smarter, have more hair, whatever the issue is. We just aren't fully forthcoming so that we sound better, look better to them. Lie to benefit ourselves is where we take advantage of other people by misleading them. Lie to harm another. This is malicious intent. It's deceiving them, not just to get something for us, but to wound them in some way, and then lying for amusement. This is kind of a sick approach to deception, that we are duping. It's to our duping delight, as the textbook would say, or at least the author said, where we love to watch other people squirm by telling them an untruth. And I have the question there: do we always benefit from lying? If we deceive somebody in any of these formats, do we always get something out of it? And I would say we always do. That's right, we're lying. Even if it's nice for them and all that, we are always getting something out of our dishonesty. In fact, I might give you that as a discussion post. I think I might do that. But to tell me, can you think of an instance where lying, even though it's nice and good for somebody else, that we don't get something out of it? So be thinking about that. Okay, next perspective, another way to approach it is 3 deception strategies. We lie in order to for distortion, that equivocation. We want to make things unclear, cloudy, ambivalent, not sure for some reason. Second is omissions, that we lie for the purpose of concealment, that we don't want somebody to know the full story, so we leave some information out. And lie for falsification, that we outright just tell somebody something that's not true, so that they won't know the full truth about whatever the issue might be. Okay, then they have a third category of a way to look at the lying and deception, what they call information manipulation theory. And they discuss this fairly thoroughly in the textbook, but a couple of principles to understand this theory and the way of thinking and where it's heading. First of all, we assume that people tend to tell the truth, that given everything being equal, people will tell the truth. They don't have any direct motivation to just lie for basically for no reason, but people will lean toward the truth. And the second reality shows that people will take advantage of this situation and manipulate the truth in their favor. So we don't, even though people tend to tell the truth, sometimes we will assume that they think we're going to tell the truth and we'll lie anyway to get what we want. So, but I think that's true. I think people, just all things being equal, we will tell the truth. If there's no reason to lie, if there's no benefit to lie, we lean on the form of truth. Nobody, except in that movie Liar, Liar, which I think I saw part of one time, there the guy has to lie all the time, Jim Carrey, and he can't help himself. But that's not us. We don't have to lie, and we tend not to lie except when we see a problem ahead or some benefit for us in deceiving others. So information manipulation theory kind of approaches lying in 4 types or categories or reasons. Liars manipulate the quantity of information, that we don't tell people the whole truth. We leave everything we say might be true, but we leave out a significant factor. And we probably have all done that. We kind of slice off the parts that we don't want other people to know. Second, liars manipulate the quantity of quality of information. That is, we overstate the case or understate the case for some benefit for ourselves, but we don't tell them. So we're not telling them the whole truth, not in quantity, but in leaving significant parts or methods. By choosing our methods, we are leaving out part of the story. That's how I would say that. Number 3, liars manipulate the manner in which they present information. And here we go back to what we said previously about ambiguity, vagueness, equivocation. We're telling them the truth, but not with the emphasis and clarification that they would need. And then 4, liars manipulate the relationship or relevance of the information, that we bring in irrelevant statements, non-responsive information, stuff that doesn't mean anything, and it tends to blur or cloud the important part of the communication. And then the textbook said that you can take these 4, and not only are there 4, but then you can each one do them a little bit or a lot. They can also be combined with one another, so they basically just have an endless combination of ways that we can deceive based on this information manipulation theory. Okay, next is detecting deception using the four-factor model. And this is why people behave differently when they lie. And so liars, so here's what this theory, this concept, this model says. First of all, liars communicate in two ways. First of all, there's an intentional part of their lying, that there are strategic attempts to appear honest. And they will use communication strategies. Boy, that's getting a little small there to read. For example, non-immediacy, reticence, withdrawal, that they will use these methods to kind of pull back from the full story, to keep themselves not as involved and not appear that they are as connected with the lie and deception as they really are. Second is dissociation from the message that they send. And third, image and relationship protecting behaviors, that they will do things that make them appear that they are being more sincere, honest, and having integrity, like smiling and nodding and affirming and kind of a warmth about them, even though in the midst of that, those are all just covers for the deception. Okay, where are we at here? So there's strategic communication methods of deception, but then also there's non-strategic leakage, unintentional leakage. That is, when we're trying to cover up our deception through a smile or a nod or those other methods we just mentioned, sometimes we can't keep track of everything in our deception. And that's what they call that leaking. I like that word, leakage, that things get out even though we try to cover them up. We can't cover everything. We can't keep track of anything. And so things that might appear, even though we're working hard verbally and our face-wise, some things that might get out is our anxiety or nervousness. People might know that we are nervous or anxious. There's a negative affect, that we tend to be more negative. And incompetent communication performance. Sometimes we don't speak as clearly as we want to because we are trying too hard to keep the coverage over our deception. Okay, where are we at here? I think we just covered all that content. I think that slide doesn't go there. So anyway, we covered all that content. So forget that slide. I think we covered that slide too. I did. Hang on a second here. Yep, so skip that slide as well. Sorry about that. So in this theory of trying to cover over our deception, there's some criticisms of this perspective. And here's just a couple of general observations where the theory is pointing out how we are so strategic in our lying and we're always working hard to cover it up and all that. But they also point out these criticisms, first of all, that sometimes it is actually less stressful to lie. If covering up the lie and all that goes with that is too difficult, sometimes it's just simple, easy, quick, fast, non-stressful to just tell a lie if it's small and seemingly almost insignificant. And that's that next level, that serious lies are more challenging and white lies are simple and easy. What we call white lies, which are the small, what we think are inconsequential lies. There's always that question of, for a Christian, is it appropriate to lie to somebody about a surprise party that you're throwing for them? And you're not going to tell them the truth. And I guess you can build a case either way, that we should always be honest. But is it okay to deceive someone when it is for their benefit? and we go back to that original list of all those different reasons for lying. So when we do it for their benefit, but we too get something out of that, in that our plans are not ruined by having to tell them the truth all the time. Anyway, okay, so something came to mind, but I'm going to skip over that. Okay, so anyway, interpersonal deception theory. Now, we're also going to talk about some personality factors. And they have about 3 or 4 different just ideas here to think about, that certain personalities tend to be better or worse liars. Now, the first one they mention is what is called a Machiavellian personality. I remember reading the book called The Prince back in college. Machiavelli was the author of that book back in the 1600s. But anyway, it was just the story of one guy giving advice to a prince of how to run a country, and basically very pragmatic. You do this because it works. You do that because it works. You don't do this because it works. If you need to lie and deceive and mislead in order to get what you need and want, you do it. Don't worry about it. Don't feel bad about having to lie. You got to do what you got to do. And so a Machiavellian personality is somebody who will just do what needs to be done, whatever bad circumstances befall somebody else. Well, that's too bad because I needed to do it for this reason. So anyway, you might be very familiar with Machiavelli, and that book called The Prince is worth reading. It's just a very interesting approach to leadership. But anyway, it's very self-centered, and manipulative and deception are all fair game and acceptable tools. But anyway, and so now they have this Machiavellian personality, somebody who doesn't care about others, who will run them over, who will use people for their own benefit, who will lie, deceive, steal, wound, kill, whatever it takes to get what you need. And so this personality type, they tend to be better liars. And I think the reason is because they don't care. They don't feel guilty. They don't feel ashamed. They don't feel embarrassed. They're doing what they need to do. And I have some relatives who were this type of personality. They just did what they did, took advantage of whatever needed to happen. So these folks will lie at the drop of a hat. And one of the reasons why they're good at it is because they don't care. They don't worry about the consequences. Even if they get caught, they say, well, okay, you caught me, so what? A second type of personality that tend to be good liars are high self-monitors. These are the people who are aware of themselves at all times, how they're coming across to others, and they don't want to look bad, and they don't want to feel bad, and but they tend to be better liars because they are experienced at shifting their approach to a relationship based on the situation at hand. So they're quick to see a change and a need for a change and to make that change. Number 3, people skilled at expressing feelings and emotions are better liars because they deal with that relationship element on a regular basis. And notice most of it's because they're what they're used to doing. They are good at these things. Competent communicators are good liars because they know how to use words. And then trained actors, the author says, can play roles convincingly, demonstrating that deception is a skill. You can learn to be a better liar. Hopefully you don't want to learn that, but you could. Okay, the difference between easy lies and difficult lies. Lies are not all in the same category. And the textbook points out about 4 elements here. First of all, prepared lies. A lie that you have thought through beforehand are easier to tell than spontaneous lies. If you're making up the lie at the moment, the possibilities for making mistakes and contradictions increase, and so work out your lies ahead of time. You will be better off. And I guess keep it simple so there's less to remember. Don't get bogged down in the anyway. I think I've learned all that from TV shows about lying. Second, lengthy lies are harder to tell than shorter ones because there's just less to keep track of. And the more involved you get, the more chance you are going to contradict yourself. Third, emotional lies are hard to tell than unemotional. If you just stick with the facts, where did you go? I went to the store, as opposed to, well, I was feeling bad and I was hurt by what this person said, so I thought I would make myself feel better by going to the store. Leave all that out. And then lying about transgressions is more difficult because that, again, probably involves more of our emotions and the deeper sense of our core, as opposed to just the more surfacey, objective, factual issues. That's easier to use those to make a better lie if you need to do that. Motivational impairment effect. And high stakes are more difficult to tell. High stake liars tend to over control their behaviors. In real life setting, as opposed to the laboratory, penalties for lying can be more severe: divorce, prison, and execution. In other words, penalties for lying can be severe for lying in certain situations versus the laboratory or the experiment. Lying can have very big consequences, and what we call high stakes lying, that they're significant. Lying to your spouse is probably different in degree, or lying to God is different in degree than lying, this is going to sound terrible, than lying to a 2-year-old of, if they ask you for a quarter and you say, I don't have one, versus telling your wife that you went to a movie when you instead went to hang out with a person of the opposite gender. So obviously it would be a huge difference in the category. Okay, detecting deception. This is kind of a different category now. So we've talked about what is lying. We've talked about what do lies look like. We've talked about why do people lie. We've talked about how people lie. We've talked about better lies and worse lies. But now we're talking about detecting deception, kind of the other side, not just the doing of the lying, but how can we figure out if somebody else is not telling the truth. Now, they say our batting average is about 50, 500, which batting is great. But if you think about it, how often that's like flipping a coin. It's not much better than that. So our percentage of being good detectives and figuring out deception isn't that great. We're just not that good at it. Veracity effect, people are better at spotting the truth than lies. So if you're listening for the truth, we can usually tell when people are telling the truth, but we can't always tell when they are directly lying to us. And they point out this truth bias, that people tend to assume others are telling the truth. Now, you can see the implications of that. If we tend to assume and give people the benefit of the doubt that people are telling the truth, then if there are better liars, we're going to be less likely to spot their lies if we already have given them the benefit of the doubt that we think they are telling the truth. And you can ask yourself, do you tend to think that when you listen to people that they're telling you the truth? And that makes sense. Why would we assume that they are lying unless we know that there's, as I say, they've got some skin in the game, that they've got something at stake? Otherwise, why would we assume automatically they are lying? But that sets people who are deceiving up for success. Wrong subjective cue hypothesis. People tend to focus on the wrong cues when detecting deception. And the textbook talks about how we often look, first thing is, well, I know they're lying by their eye contact. If they won't look me in the eye, they're probably lying. And the textbook says that's a really bad strategy for detecting deception. And so we will often miss it because we're not looking for the right things. And they even kind of talk about intuition, just kind of how do you feel if they're telling the truth, maybe just as effective as looking at their eyes and are they looking at you or will they not look you in the eye? Continuing on detecting deception, there was what's called the familiarity bias. And this is the question of, if you know somebody well, are you able to figure out whether they are lying as opposed to a stranger or somebody you don't know as well? And they say it's kind of yes on both sides. On the one hand, we are familiar with friends, intimates, and family members' behavior because we know their behavior, because we know how they behave. When they are acting different than the norm, it could be a sign that they are up to something deceptive to us. So when there's an aberration from the norm. But at the same time, because of the fact of a truth bias, and we tend to give people in general the benefit of the doubt, and maybe people we care about and love, we're going to give them even more benefit of the doubt. We're going to miss some things if they're trying to deceive us because we don't catch everything. And then they talk about the opposite of what's called a negative relationship can result in a lie bias, that people we are angry at, hurt by, in a negative relationship with, maybe a ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, ex-wife or husband, that if we don't like them, if we are angry at them, we tend not to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so we will assume quite often that they're lying, and we don't trust them, and so we don't give them the benefit of the doubt. So suspicion, they discussed suspicion in here when we think other people are lying, or when we are wondering if somebody is thinking we are lying. And it says expressing suspicion, letting people know that we are not sure about them, then we are going to try harder to cover up our deception. Next is probing, asking questions, searching for somebody to spill the beans. Asking questions does not increase accuracy of deception detection. This is very surprising to me, that you can ask all the questions you want, but they say overall, it's not going to help you figure out if somebody is lying or not if you ask questions. And then they have the probing heuristic. Third parties tend to view probed liars as more honest. So if they had a third party watch somebody being interrogated and probed, and then they took out the probing questions, we're just looking at the person being probed, being investigated, they would tend to think that they are more honest. So again, it's a proof that we can't tell all the time where people are lying. We think we can, but the textbook is tending to say, nope, we're not as good at this as we think we are. And then finally, they have 2 or 3 different ways of active attempts to increase behavioral differences. That is, if we can do something, can we help somebody, nudge somebody along to spill the beans and help them to come to a point of honesty? The first one is called an imposing a cognitive load. That is, you're putting a stress test on somebody for the truth. So the thinking is this, that when we are deceiving somebody, that takes intentional mental effort. Unless we are of that Machiavellian type, it's not just going to roll right off. We're going to have to work at it. And when we have to work at it, it means we have reduced our mental capacity to keep track of everything. And as we are trying to cover up our lies, or look more honest, or speak without our voices cracking, or forgetting what we were saying, or pausing, we just can't keep track of all that. And so we try to do something to force them to try to cover up their lies, and then we point out that their attempts are not so good, and it's obvious that they are sweating, they are forgetting, they are stammering, and all those things. And then they give an example. Having them tell a story backwards increases cognitive load. So what can you do to get people to have to work harder mentally? That kind of gives away the fact that they were deceiving us. Second is strategic use of evidence, or SEU. And this is, I guess, what show would it be? CSI or maybe Law and Order, where you have some information, some evidence against the person, but you're going to hold off on revealing that you have that information. You're going to kind of try to walk them down a path where they are going to say something that you know is not true, and you can prove it's not true by the evidence that you have. And then you're going to ask them about that and say, now, can you explain the contradiction between what you say and this fact or this evidence that we have? And this is where they are going to get stumped because they don't have a good explanation. But they say it's better to wait and don't play your hand too soon. Wait, because it will have more power. Now, there is an old phrase I've stolen or gotten from, I think I got it from Law and Order, one of my favorite shows, and it's it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And you will notice so many times in that show where, they made it clear by the way they did the show that somebody's lying and not telling the truth, but the lawyers can't prove it. They think it, they feel it, but they just cannot get the person to admit it or confess it. And so you're trying to increase the likelihood that they're going to spill the beans themselves, as opposed to you having to prove that they are not telling the truth. So anyway, so strategic use of evidence. Excuse me. And then the third one is a context-sensitive information. That this is where you want to take everything into account. The context may help you decide if somebody is telling the truth or not telling the truth, just based on what the general knowledge that you have. And they used the little girl who claims that she plays for the Denver Broncos football, and just based on, you don't have to prove it. I guess you could by looking at the roster or getting a list of paychecks, but you don't have to prove it, in that you look around and you say, well, there are no 5-year-olds playing professional football, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the context can help clarify when somebody is not telling the full truth. Okay, so that is that chapter. It's rather brief, but I found it rather interesting. So like I said, I think if I hadn't done it already, I'm going to load up a discussion question based back on deception. Hang on, let me go way back to the beginning here. And where was it? Hang on. Oh, do we always benefit from lying? If we say, well, it's for their benefit, but do we always get something out of it when we lie, no matter how noble our intentions are? Do we always get something out of it? So anyway, I might post that. Okay, so that's it for now. Thank you, and we'll be talking to you soon.